First discussion we have with us Emily Lau, former legislator, chairman of the Democratic Party. Lawrence Ma is a barrister, chairman of the Hong Kong Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and Holden Chow, legislator, and other academics will be joining us in the course of the programme as well. Ms Lau, good morning to you. Thank you indeed for joining us. It does seem like there is a kind of a common mood among these statements from Beijing officials and former Beijing officials. What do you think is do you think there is a common message, and what is that?
Well, I think the message coming out from Beijing and these officials is very, very worrying and disturbing because they seem to continue the very hardline policy, or maybe make it even harder, and that is bad news for Hong Kong. Many people had thought that the new chief executive, Carrie Lam, who will take office on July 1st, will adopt a different policy, a different attitude from C.Y. Leung, the current one, who is deeply unpopular. And we hope that Carrie will have the freedom to work with all parties in the Legislative Council and in civil society so as try to reach consensus on big policy topics and move Hong Kong forward. But if Beijing insists to take such a hard line, maybe the new chief executive will have very little room for maneuver. And if that's the case, then I think the struggle, the confrontation will continue. And that is very bad news for Hong Kong and bad news for the country.
Emily, Carrie Lam did say that although she understands that legislating Article 23 was a constitutional obligation, the subject is highly controversial and could easily cause social disturbance, and, was not likely that she would approach this subject in the near future. So why now? Why suddenly we have all these, hard lines coming up?
Well, that's why I find it very puzzling. And if that means that Beijing is going to force Carrie to go ahead and try to legislate on Article 23 of the Basic Law soon after she assumes office, and that would be against Carrie's wish and also against the wish of many Hong Kong people. So really, I'm nobody to interpret Beijing's mind, but if they are hell-bent on sending very disturbing and very tough hardline messages to Hong Kong, then, as in their own words, the hearts of the Hong Kong people will not return to the mainland. And if they don't understand this simple logic, their head needs examining.
Is this any more than we've actually been warned to expect? Is this what we were told would happen if if people pushed ahead with their independence talk and turned down the deals on political reform? Well,
I think you shouldn't mix the two things. I think there are some people who say they want independence, many young people and some older ones. But in Hong Kong, I would like to think that we have freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. But we have to ask, why do these people think this way? They have not espoused such views for many years, and it only happened in the last few years. What has happened to change that? And why can't we have a dialogue with those people instead of keep coming down on them like a ton of bricks? And over certain things, you can't change things with such hard tactics. And in fact, with the young people, you may make things worse. So I don't know what is it that Beijing is trying to say to us. And then the military, the PLA flexing its muscle and all that. I mean, do we need that? We are proud to say that Hong Kong is one of the safest and one of the most peaceful city in the world amid this international terrorism and all these attacks. So we are very safe, and it is this way because we, the Hong Kong people, want it. So what is it in Hong Kong that strikes so much fear in the hearts of Beijing? Will they please tell us?
What do you think Xi Jinping is likely to say, given these sort of statements by other Beijing officials? Do you think he's likely to strike a similar tone?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, or maybe maybe because some people have done the dirty work, then maybe he will say something more conciliatory. I just don't know. I am the last person to know how to second-guess Beijing. That's never been my habit. But all I want to say is that most Hong Kong people do not want independence, but they do want Beijing to keep its promise of one country, two systems, and leave us to do our internal affairs. People are prepared to give Carrie Lam a chance. That's why people say, don't march, don't go out and say, step down Carrie Lam. Give her a chance. But then Beijing also has to give her a chance. Several weeks ago, there was a report saying she has written to Beijing asking for A, to have more freedom, more autonomy, to set up her own team and to run Hong Kong, and B, to tell the Central Government Liaison Office to stick to what it's supposed to do, and that is to liaise with all parties and not to interfere in the affairs of the SAR. I think if she had said that to Beijing, she's quite right, and I hope Beijing would listen to her. I mean, if they pick her as the chief executive and then would not allow her freedom, autonomy to do her things, then it's not helping her and not helping Hong Kong.
Lawrence Ma, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh. Good morning, Ada.
Do you agree that there seems to be a very hard line emerging with these comments from various officials?
I think it shouldn't be taken out of context. If you read what he said while in federal countries, political problems were resolved at the local level. In a country like China, all politics is central. I think there's a precursor to that statement. So I think what has led up to this statement is from the 2014 occupying Central and people trying to overthrow A31, the NPCSC decision on the 31st of August. That was a political test because people has to be patriotic in the eye of Beijing in order to be appointed. So Hong Kong has a guided, or in a more draconian word, a controlled democracy, whereas in other federal countries with a federal system, the provincial head of government could be of a different from a different political party or belief with the federal government. So appointment by the federal head of state of the provincial head of government were mere formalities and a matter of course. But in our country, appointment of the chief executive is a substantive power in a unitary state. So therefore, I think what has led to this statement is because people wanted to have democracy and to elect their own chief executive. But this person has to be appointed by Beijing, and because it's in a system of unitary government, that person has to go for a political test. That he has to be patriotic in our Beijing. So Hong Kong people cannot accept, because we want to compare ourselves with Australia, with Canada, for example, that whoever we elected in Hong Kong has to be appointed. There is no power to control that. So when Wang Zhenming was talking about all politics is central, I think what is being encapsulating is that because this is a unitary state that Hong Kong people have to understand, and therefore your Hong Kong chief executive's political belief has to be, quote, patriotic, sufficiently patriotic in the eye of Beijing.
Lawrence, what about this remark of Zhang Dejiang in his 50-minute speech? He said that the relationship between the central government and Hong Kong is that of delegation of power and not power sharing. Is that something new, or is it narrowing the definition of one country, two systems?
I don't think it's new. Now, what people have been talking about one country, two system is, in politics, is a concept people talk about in politics. But one country, two system is not a hollow thing. It is based on the basic law. Now, if nobody really cares to really read in depth of the basic law, because politicians are politicians anyway, lawyers are lawyers. So if you read deep in the basic law, it's written blatantly on basic law, in the basic law, that Hong Kong's power, being the judicial power, the executive power, the legislative power, they are all vested. And because that's a vesting of power, the source of power comes from the central government. And that's how we understand the law. So when Zhang Lejiang was making the comment that Hong Kong, there's a comprehensive power of management of Hong Kong, it is not something new. It can be found in the Basic Law, the 8 heads of powers. We can name it if you want me to. For example, the power to interpret the Basic Law. That's one of the powers. So these powers are not new powers. They have been written in the Basic Law since 1990.
Do you think that we had the wrong understanding then of the Basic Law? Did we just were we on a wild goose chase basically with our understanding of what sort of autonomy Hong Kong was promised in '97?
I don't think we have difficulty understanding it. There are not things that's written in Shakespeare's Hamlet. They are plain English language, but just people don't want to believe it. People just don't want to accept it. That Beijing has powers that's been written in the Basic Law, because they want to think about one country, two systems in their own mind. That you don't come and interfere with me, and I don't have to go over and I have my own full autonomy. People have different ideas of high degree of autonomy, but those high degree of autonomy has to be taken out from the Basic Law as to what is the high degree of autonomy.
Emily Lau, do you think that we've had the wrong end of the stick for 20 years? We haven't understood the real implications of one country, two systems.
I don't think so. But many people, both here and foreigners, have told me that Beijing did not mean what it said. I said, I don't care. Well, they've said something to us and to the United Nations, to the international community, to the British government, and we're going to hold them to it. That's it. And some people think we are very, very naive because we believe Beijing. But I guess what else can we believe? And we're not going to wage a revolution. So all we can do is say, hey, this is what you said, and you better keep your words. And if they keep reinterpreting it, misinterpreting it with the help of Lawrence Ma and others, well, we have to just tell them that is not right.
Well, Emily, I don't think I in any occasion misinterpreted the Basic Law. I mean, you got to point to particular incidents when you make accusations. I mean, I believe Hong Kong has an independent judiciary, and they read the Basic Law according to the principles of statutory interpretation and constitutional interpretation. If you are saying that there are certain decisions that is not conforming with the Basic Law, you can test it in the court. I still firmly believe that Hong Kong's judiciary is not compliant to Beijing politics. Yeah.
I think that to allow Hong Kong to elect the chief executive and allow all members of the Legislative Council by universal and equal suffrage doesn't mean Hong Kong will become an independent city like Australia, the country. So, and also, those are promises in the Basic Law that we can choose the chief executive and legislature by universal suffrage. So what we're saying to Beijing is, hey, come on, let us get on with it. Why do you say that we are trying to copy an independent country?
Well, the chief executive has to be appointed by Beijing.
Well, yes, we accept that. So, but first of all, the person should be elected by universal suffrage, then appointed by Beijing. And if Beijing does not want to appoint the person elected by the people of Hong Kong, they have to give an explanation. We accept that.
Lawrence Ma, are you concerned at all about these statements about the PLA, about the role of the PLA, and saying that the PLA has to play a greater role in fostering patriotism in Hong Kong? What do you think's going on there? Because, of course, they've had a very low-key role so far.
Yeah, I mean, they've been... they have not been out on the street in uniform scaring Hong Kong people, that's for sure. They've been very contained. But what Chen Zhe was saying was that they represent a sign of sovereignty, that because their presence in Hong Kong, we look into Hong Kong as an international city. We have, United States battleships coming on shore, and we are very exposed place because we have a lot of allies that can travel here and that sort of thing. So presence of army in Hong Kong really does represent sovereignty. I think that's the end of the statement. You shouldn't be reading too far into that. That the military will come out and take control or do things that's harmful to the civil society.
That's not true, Lawrence. I was at a reception a few nights ago, and some foreign businessman told me, they say, look what they're talking about the PLA. I think we are all waiting to see what's going to happen on July 1st. They are very tense. I had to assure them that nothing much is going to happen unless the Beijing or Hong Kong government said something very provocative in the next few days. But the business community, the international community is very tense because of all these remarks about the PLA and about Hong Kong people fighting for independence. They seem to expect something nasty is going to happen on July 1st. How terrible.
Well, if you are exposed to international business communities, I can tell you that Australian communities in Hong Kong are not very at all. I mean, you are probably exposed to a very different set of foreigners in Hong Kong.
Well, of course there are different foreigners, but I'm
people
telling you what
approach
people
me and tell me that and ask me questions, and they are very calm. They are not very worried about any Hong Kong politics. They welcome Chinese government's involvement in Hong Kong because that they don't want disturbing politics in Hong Kong. They don't want people claiming independence in Hong Kong. They like the place here as it is. They wanted it to be regulated, and they're not very worried about it. So I mean, you can't take some of your friends' comment and scare off all the peoples in Hong Kong.
I am not just I'm not making any comments that I like.
Yeah, you can, but I'm just telling you that there's another world other than your world in Hong Kong, and there are other foreigners. Then foreigners that you have, that you talk to. I spoke to foreigners too because I come from Australia. I lived there for 20 years. And I have contacts with a lot of foreigners.
I do accept there are people who think the way you do. But then there are others who are apprehensive. And I was a bit taken aback when I was told that because I myself do not expect very nasty confrontations to take place on July 1st. But those people said it because of what people say about the People's Liberation Army. I'm just reporting to you what I heard. But when you hear something you don't like, you lose your temper.
No,
we should behave like that.
I'm just Emily, what could happen on the 1st of July? Because even the so-called the localist movement has died down, and we don't really see a lot of active happenings recently.
Of course, Ada, they are planning a march. And, of course, the Democratic Party and others from the pro-democracy camp will take part. But I certainly hope, and I insist, that it would be a peaceful and orderly demonstration. I never support violence and bloodshed, even if I resort to civil disobedience. It's in a peaceful way. And I certainly hope that what happened on July 1st will be peaceful and orderly, and people will come out to express their views, and so they should be allowed to do so. And I certainly do not hope to see the people getting into a big confrontation with the police.
Okay, well, also joining us now is Holden Chow, legislator, vice chairman of the DAB. Mr. Chow, good morning to you.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. What do you make of these recent comments by Wang Zhiming, by Chen Zhiwe, by Zhou Nan, and by others, these fairly kind of hardline statements? Do you think they're just clearing up misunderstandings, or do you think that they're suggesting that there is a new approach to Hong Kong in Beijing?
Well, I think I can simply interpret it as a just to let everybody know that, first of all, the one country, two system principle works well all along in the 20 years. Of course, there would be challenges, but at the same time, I think generally speaking, I personally believe that it works well. And also, it probably might remind people that, recently there are people who hold very radical views, including some people, I say would be minority, who take the view that Hong Kong should become independent or should separate from the mainland China. That is actually contravening the Basic Law. I mean, if you read the Article 1 of the Basic Law, it states clearly that Hong Kong is part of China, and it's always been so. So I think it's just simply a statement or a reminder, just to remind people that especially for those who hold very radical views, that might not do anything good for the city. So I think, generally speaking, the one country, two system principle works well, and as long as people don't turn too much radical or just don't blow things out of proportion or not to demonize the central government to the extent that everything done by the central government is in a bad faith.
To be honest, it sounds. A lot of the comments suggest like more deep-seated kind of problems than that, though. To be honest, Mr. Chow, talk about the need to re-enlighten Hong Kong people. Talk about them being brainwashed for 5 generations and so on. Hearts have to be reunified and things like this. It really sounds like Beijing doesn't trust Hong Kong.
Well, I never use the word brainwash, because if you use the word brainwash, that means you're talking about something radical again, and then you would use the term brainwash, actually. I never use that sort of terms. But I think what I would say is, of course, in Hong Kong, we have a different systems from mainland China, but of course we respect the system to be operated in mainland China too, and at the same time I trust the central government also respects our system to be operated in Hong Kong all along. So we have our own rule of law, we have our own capitalism. So I would say it's a mutual respect, and I trust that the central government does respect our system. And of course, apparently, if you look at the over the 20 years, as I say, despite challenges, I think the system as a whole functions well. And if, for example, if we are really jeopardizing the one country, two systems, or it doesn't work anymore, I think the foreign investment or foreign investor will move away straight ahead. But it doesn't happen, isn't it? Everyone stays here. Yeah.
Holden Chow, it's still very worrying for me that, we have 10 more days until 1st of July, and suddenly we have all these people who have retired. They have re-emerged, like Mr. Chen Zhuo and also Zhou Nan, and they're talking about things that happened 20 years ago, that we've been brainwashed by the colonialists and that our hearts have not been reunified. What sort of help could that, bring? I think we do have a mistrust, but this sort of remarks would not help the situation at all.
Well, I think everyone is free to hold their own view, but I think we should have a confidence on ourselves, isn't it? Well, first of all, we have our own systems running here for over 20 years, and it works well, isn't it? And I think everybody in the rest of the world notice and understand that too, and also including the central government. I think the central government also understands that. So I don't think people or we should worry too much about the one or two particular terms used by individuals. I mean, we should have confidence of our own, and we know that we have a different systems from mainland, and we respect each other. So if we hold that view and we don't simply exaggerate or blow things out of proportion, or don't simply just focus too much on one or two particular terms, then I think we are fine. Yeah.
Emily Lau?
Well, I think if we have people like Holden Chow and his party representing Hong Kong, particularly expressing our views to Beijing, I think we are courting disaster. Well, no matter what view you hold, Holden, and we're both from the London School of Economics, we should have the honesty and the integrity to tell the people in power the fear and concern of some Hong Kong people, and obviously, of course, the feeling of pride and really a big pleasure, like Mr. Ma, to Beijing too. But we should tell them that, hey, there are people who are worried. What's going on? As Ada said, how come all these people are being trotted out to say all these things which alarm and disturb certain Hong Kong people?
Okay, well, we've got the 9 o'clock news now, so we will have to break. Emily, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Emily Lau from the Democratic Party. Thank you to Holden Chow, Vice Chairman of the DAB. We'll continue after the news at 9. Before that, the weather, mainly cloudy with showers and a few squally thunderstorms. Today, 26 degrees, the latest readings, relative humidity now at 97%. No warnings.
Hundreds of firefighters on duty. More than 130 other people have been injured. You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back. This is Backchat on a Tuesday morning with Ada Wong and me, Hugh Chiverton. We're continuing to talk about those recent comments from Beijing officials and former Beijing officials on 20 years of the SAR and one country, two systems. We have with us Emily Lau is staying on, former legislator and chairman of the Democratic Party, and we have Lawrence Ma, barrister, chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. We're also joined now by Professor Linda Lee, who's a professor of political science at the Department of Public Policy at the City University. Later we're going to be talking about the arrest, but now charges have been dropped against that old woman selling a piece of cardboard for $1. We'll be talking about the implications of that with Dr. Kwok Kar-ki from the Civic Party. Again, our email address if you want to comment, backchat@rthk.hk. You can go to our Facebook page as well. That's Backchat on RTHK Radio 3. Some comment from there. Thank you very much indeed. Stephen says it's a shame, as it sounds like Wang Jimin and Chen Zuo need to study the basic law and learn it by heart, particularly Article 2. Quote, the National People's Congress authorises the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to exercise a high degree of autonomy and enjoy executive, legislative and independent judicial power, including that of final adjudication in accordance with the provisions of this law. Hong Kong is part of China with a high degree of autonomy. It does not have to follow the mainland. That comes from Stephen. TC says, I think mainland officials are giving the British colonial authorities too much credit as well as ignoring their own shortcomings. The fact that most Hong Kong residents before 1997 considered themselves Chinese and that localist or pro-independence sentiment didn't exist shows that the British didn't engage in brainwashing, or if they were to attempt to brainwash the ethnic Chinese in Hong Kong, it was ineffective. Effective governments or soft power shouldn't be confused with brainwashing. Henry says what mainland officials said have been repeatedly said on previous occasions. The problem lie in die-hard perceptions of many people in their painful experience in mainland and foreign interventions where Hong Kong is being played as part of the contained China strategy, in opposition groups in Hong Kong, in people not taking an active interest in the fast developments in their motherland and using their outdated impressions of China as their guide. History shows Britain always leaves a lot of problems when they leave their colonies, but some Hong Kong people fail to see that the return of sovereignty is not just a change of flag, but involves numerous changes, obvious and subtle. People's mindset, pride in having a Chinese national identity, an understanding of China's modern history to present days, all need to be established. Such cannot be achieved in a short piece of time. Hong Kong has suffered tremendously through JR, filibustering, Occupy Central, etc., with huge cost in opportunity lost. The court case of Longhair receiving millions of money shows foreign intervention is still rampant. The SAR 20-year anniversary could be seen as Hong Kong's coming of age, and Hong Kong have to shrug off all these negative things and pass on. President Xi is hard-nosed, and his visit this time could carry considerable significance, which might be shown in Carrie Lam's governance. It's likely that there will be much closer integration and involvement of mainland in Hong Kong's governance, particularly with the national initiatives, plus addressing issues raised by mainland officials these days. That comes from Henry. Linda Lee, good morning to you, and thanks for joining us. Do you think these comments are the sign that there will be a change of attitude, a new attitude towards Hong Kong after this anniversary?
I personally, I tend not to read too much into comments by individual officials, especially we are always aware that there are different opinions and voices within the Beijing leadership. Not to say the millions of Chinese officials in the mainland. And I think in particular, I'm mindful of this evolving national strategy of the Belt and Road Initiative, which, to my knowledge and my understanding, talks of the need to develop the soft powers of China. By soft powers, which means that obviously it's beyond GDP growth, the development material wealth, which Hong Kong has contributed a lot in the past 3.5 decades, almost 4. But in particular, I think the Chinese leadership is aware of the importance of actually developing further its governance approach, and not only domestically but also extending its impact overseas in the global arena. But the challenge is enormous. I mean, the challenge of fulfilling this vision is enormous. And I think, increasingly, the central leadership has recognized the strategic role and contribution of Hong Kong as, in particular, why Hong Kong has this strategic role, precisely because we live in a different system within the one country. So, the ongoing, dominant and prevalent perception of, a lot of tensions, issues between Hong Kong and mainland, especially over the last few years, and also because we discussed we did not get the universal suffrage right of our chief executive and the entire legislative council, which give rise to a feeling that Hong Kong is actually coming to a head-to-head position, with the mainland, and also the independence discussion does not help. But I think with this discussion on this national strategy and the increasing recognition of Hong Kong's strategic role, I think this really would change the mindset of the Chinese leaders regarding the significance of this one country, two system arrangement, and in particular the systems of Hong Kong. Okay, which in other words, this is not a matter of historical legacy. That is not because of what happens in the 19th and 20th century that Hong Kong is left with this different system, which the China has to live with, kind of a tolerated, because it doesn't want to really damage its international relations and the international image. No longer this is the case. China needs this second system, not only because it wants to develop its economic development and it needs the technological know-how from Hong Kong, but it actually needs Hong Kong to help develop its soft powers.
I hear what you're saying, but then why are these people saying this? Why are the people invoking the PLA? Why are they talking about brainwashing? Why are they talking about the need to re-enlighten?
That's simple. I tell you, Hugh. That's simple because what some leaders or what the presidency has in mind may not necessarily filter down to everybody in the government. So within mainland, my discussion with people in the policy circle tells me exactly this is an evolving process. Okay, so people have different understanding and people might have different vested interests. So I think it might take a while for this to filter down further. And so we in Hong Kong, we are in the best position to recognize our strategic role. So we should be clear-minded, we should be calm, and we should see our own importance and our and the vision. So don't bother too much about a lot of voices, and we know how to differentiate. That's my take.
Well, Professor Lee, the thing is, a lot of people cannot differentiate, and
that's why we are talking here.
Yeah, I mean, and people are scared, and I think you're being very optimistic about the future of Hong Kong's strategic role. I would tend to believe in it, but then, if Hong Kong would have a strategic role, would that be diminished when Beijing would now like to go into further details of consolidating sovereignty over Hong Kong, as announced by Zhang Dezhang last week? He mentioned the pace of political reform, its power over the chief executive, and its authority to appoint and dismiss key officials as areas. So what do you make of this?
Well, I think, we have heard very specific comments by various individuals since 1980s when we started discussion over the future of Hong Kong. So I think, we need to simply, I do see that we need to respond to these specific, comments from time to time. But my take is that, first of all, I don't contest the statement that, the central government has kind of, overall leadership over Hong Kong. After all, they see this as constitutionally, they see the Chinese embrace a unitary political system, but Hong Kong and Macau is a special case within the unitary system. So that's why it has been enshrined in the Constitution. We have a clause, right, and allowing the National People's of Congress to legislate separately for these two cities. So constitutionally, I think the NPC has already made provisions for us.
Well, okay.
So they are just proclaiming the obvious. But what we need to do is actually to advise the central leadership, okay, and then to show them the strategic vision that they are starting to embrace. It's not something that they're wishful thinking. So in other words, this is something that we make it happen. We materialize our utility, then they see that this is something too important to lose.
Okay, there's an echo of that in an email, thank you very much indeed, from Donald, who says, Joe Nam is old school. He talked in Chairman Mao lingo and sounded funny. But I do believe many Hong Kong people have a British Hong Kong sensibility very different from China's. Speaking for myself, I came through the British Hong Kong education system. My English history textbooks in secondary school were all written by Anglo-American writers. The Opium Wars was described as a conflict of free trade, culture and military technology. I don't recall any of these writers designated any chapter to discuss the legitimacy of selling opium. Joe Nam's brainwash may be harsh words, but it's also true that our perception has a built-in bias. Yesterday I heard Noam Chomsky on the radio discuss the racialism behind colonialism. Indeed, until today, many Hong Kong people still harbour the racial sensibility of the colonial times. I do not believe in nationalism of any country, of any nationality. However, I do believe we need to examine the conventional sensibilities from many angles. Donald, many thanks for your comment. Emily Lau, what about Linda Lee's approach? Maybe we are valuable, maybe we're increasingly valuable to China as it wishes to extend its soft power, as it wishes to, get into the Belt and Road and become a major player on the world scene and all those things. Actually, it needs Hong Kong more and more, not in a strictly material sense, but in a broader sense.
Well, I think there are different views on that, and that is fine.
And maybe different views within Beijing. And you've got Joe Nan, who was a 90s guy, and there's we're in the 21st century now. Yeah,
I mean there are people who say that Hong Kong's value to the mainland is diminishing fast, and there are people who say the opposite. Well, that is fine, and people will continue to argue and disagree. But the most important thing to many Hong Kong people is whether we can guarantee our freedoms, our free lifestyle, the rule of law, social justice, not a very corrupt system, and all these, which are our core values. And many people feel they are being undermined by certain Hong Kong people and by all these threats and interference from Beijing. And of course, as we approach July 1st, many Hong Kong people would like to think that the new government of Carrie Lam will have the autonomy and the freedom to exercise powers and to unite Hong Kong again, because right now it is a city that is split asunder by the policy of Beijing and Hong Kong. And those are the things that certain people are concerned about. So whether we continue to be valuable to Beijing or not, we can continue to debate. But of course, if Hong Kong is a peaceful, civilized, and happy and democratic city, then I hope we will be even more useful to the mainland. And it is very important that the leaders in Beijing, people who make decisions which affect us, should be aware of the people's concerns and aspirations.
Okay, here's a comment from Jalal. Lawrence Ma, you might want to respond to this. Jalal says, Dear Backchat, Lawrence and Holden will say or defend anything that supports the national government in the name of patriotism. They set up a straw man of pro-independence advocates as a bogeyman to justify their repressive masters. You never hear them fighting for the fundamental rights of Hong Kong people. You never hear them standing up against the powerful for our rights to democracy, political freedoms and freedom of speech. The truth is that theirs is the dialectic of the powerful. It does not recognise the plight of Hong Kong people or the Chinese people. That comes from Jalal. Lawrence Ma?
Yeah, I don't think we have not stand up to the rule of law. I think we have enjoyed the freedom that's been given to us in protesting. I agree with that. I mean, even people come out on the 1st of July to come out and protest. I agree that they have such a right. I mean, the problem with Hong Kong is people have too much rights in this respect. We are probably the most protested countries or cities in the world. That there have been over 7,000 protests in Hong Kong over a year. We have been putting too much of our attention in the politics and not focusing or drawing our minds into developments. For example, the Belt and Road Initiative. Whatever that's been proposed by the mainland government, we oppose it. For example, the Belt and Road. Even Americans and Japanese and Japan now come onto the table and accepted to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, because that's an international strategy initiated by China, and we are skeptical about it. So it's not about me not voicing out protecting our rights, because our rights is already protected in the basic law, which is enforceable in a court of law.
Aren't we skeptical? Aren't we skeptical because we're thinking of this as a business opportunity, and we're looking at it. We're looking at the pros and cons from a business point of view, not from a patriotic point of view.
You're right. Yeah.
You know, and that's what we do in Hong Kong. We don't jump on every patriotic bandwagon.
Yeah, a lot of the political problems actually has its root in economy, because we don't have, so for example, sufficient jobs for people. People got disgruntled and they go onto the street and protest. And if we have
we've got plenty of jobs in Hong Kong. The unemployment rate's not significant.
Yeah, it's 3%. For the last few years.
True, but Hong Kong's economy is not going up.
Lawrence, and you cannot say that we have too much rights. The same rights are rights. They are fundamental rights. They are basic rights. And, not everybody is going out to the streets. Even with the different numbers, perhaps a few thousand or, 10,000, 20,000, still the majority of the Hong Kong people would like to see Hong Kong, as a place where their children can go up. But now there are so many problems, and I mean everybody has this fear, and a lot of my friends are disturbed because they believe that the overall atmosphere is not good, and things are being tightened, and there seems to be a lot of white terror around. Although I cannot really describe what that is. Do you agree that this is happening?
Well, I think tightening up control by Beijing is a matter of fact. I don't disagree with that. But if you live in a place, you got to like the place. If I live in Australia, I got to love Australia, like Australia. But if you live in Hong Kong and you decided not to like China, you better leave, or you pick a better place to go that you like. So if I live in Hong Kong and keep scaring about Chinese politics, and not accepting me being a Chinese, then problem arises, isn't it?
Okay, a couple more comments just on the PLA. John says, well, let's maybe have this one from Fergus first, who says, I recently took a tourist up Route Twisk past the Sekong barracks. Most of the buildings there have fallen into a great state of shabby disrepair. What's to be proud of in the PLA occupation of Hong Kong and management of its estate? It's a slum landlord. Take the land back to help the housing crisis, says Fergus. And John says, China definitely needs a good spin doctor. No one in Hong Kong ever thought of the PLA in a negative way. We don't see them or feel them. When they do engage with the population, they open the barracks and lots of visitors are very happy. PLA are the good guys. During Occupy Central, no one was worried about intervention. Ironically, PLA in Hong Kong has so far been the good side of China, and now, why are they using the PLA's name in vain? That thought comes from John. Professor Lee, do you want to just pick up on that? Invoking the PLA in the way that has been done recently, that's quite unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the key is actually, as Emily said, how to make Hong Kong a happier city, right? I agree that, our rights has no problem. Absolutely, we should not complain that we have too many rights. But actually, why people have so many protests want to go to streets? Because they feel unhappy. So that's why they want to voice out. I think this is something that we should not complain about. The problem is, and I don't see the problem in our skepticism on Belt and Road. The point is, don't let our skepticisms blind us of opportunities. I think positive skepticism is good because we need a scientific mind, a calm mind to really evaluate the risk factor. Actually, I think the leadership right these days they're very well aware of the risk factors, and they are reaching out to Hong Kong professionals to help them. Okay, to help them to manage the risk factor better. And obviously, if our people, our entrepreneurs, our own people, we are already more careful than people in there. I think we are much better positioned to do this job. And so the point is not skepticism is a problem. Whether we have a rational mind, okay, to evaluate issues and not to lose the vision of Hong Kong's strategic role and how to make ourselves happier and help others as well.
Okay, well, just a couple of comments to finish off. Thank you very much indeed. From listeners, Colin says an old Chinese proverb, a rusty nail will be hammered in. And Bowen says, Dear Backchat, if 5 generations of Hong Kongers have been brainwashed by the colonisers before the handover, then surely Hugh must not be allowed to leave the studio today before he divulges the objectives and methods of that brainwashing. More seriously, the point is that all the people who came to Hong Kong from the mainland came by choice. As such, they did not need to be told by the British what to think about the regime they were escaping from, and neither did their offspring. In this day and age, when rather few people, particularly those in a city like Hong Kong, can or would claim to be 100% anything, it seems futile and counterproductive to try to dominate any discussion by appealing to racial or ancestral origins alone. If Hong Kong is to play the role that's been cut out for it, it must continue to embrace what's best of East and West, to adamantly refuse to listen to the song of the proverbial siren. If it fails to do that, there would be no justification for one country, two systems to exist at all. If it succeeds, Hong Kong has to be by definition somewhat different from mainland China, including its politics. This does not mean that Hong Kong is an independent political entity, rather it's just that its difference has been guaranteed in the terms under which its sovereignty was returned to China. Chinese officials should also note that when the British acquired Hong Kong from China, they did not do so with the explicit undertaking that Hong Kong would be governed under a system different from that in the UK. Even so, Hong Kong's politics was never quite the same as British politics, as was claimed to be the case. That comes from Bowen. Bowen, thank you very much indeed for that comment. Thank you to our guests this morning, to Linda Lee there, Professor of Politics at the City University, to Barrister Lawrence Ma, and to Emily Lau, former legislator and chairman of the Democratic